Okay, all right. So, welcome to the stream. Let me just confirm that it is live. And that the audio is working. Yeah, it seems to be. Okay, all right. So, welcome. What I'm going to be doing today is working on a project called Leopold for Cisco NSO. So, if you go to the DevNet Sandbox and search for NSO, there is an always-on version, right, for this topology. Now, not all of these devices are ready and loaded, but this is the topology they give you, and you have access to the sandbox. And if we launch Postman, there is a really nice collection that is preloaded, as you can see here, with variables and an environment file. So load the environment file on for the always-on read-only sandbox, and then get the collection NSO sample API requests always on. And these requests all work, right? So if we do this API call against the RESTCONF interface using this path to tailf NCS devices device, it's getting the payload back and will give you a list of all of the devices with all of these keys and fields and information, right? So there happens to be 3 devices in the payload. So if we switch over to the Python code, right, that you can do this at home, and they have all of these examples. I've started with just devices, all of the devices, and I also did the device groups. If we go to NSO groups, list device groups, and we're just going to get rid of the filter, and we have this payload. So for the start of the stream, to explain right what we're doing, I'll show you the working code for device groups in Python. And again, you can always just reveal this as code and run this as Python. And the adjustment you would have to make is add verify false to the request because it's self-signed. And that code would work. So let's go over to the code. And let's look at the output. Here is that same payload that we got through Postman that we're making as a file called devicegroups.json. And it has the 3 devices, or excuse me, device groups. The group all with all members and all groups, and then each individual group afterwards for, the ASAs, for example. So that is the device group as JSON, and here as it is as YAML, and we can express this same thing as a YAML dictionary if you prefer YAML to JSON, and then the CSV file, which we can filter and say, show me just the NXOS devices or groups. And that would have the 2 member switches, the net ID, and any major alarms. So the HTML looks like this. This is a Datatable powered HTML file, where we can, let's say we want the net ID next to it. We can rearrange these. We can limit the visibility. We can search up here. We're looking for, say, dist. Let's try right? We can filter in the groups here, just all. It's really nice, this data table. It's paginated, and we can actually export it and print it and do different things with it. We also make a Markdown file, and I make this in case this code's being, and I recommend that you run this code in a Git-based repository, because then you would get all the differentials over time. If we ran this every 10 minutes or every hour in a Git-based system, right, all these fields, when they change, would be changed through a Git mechanism, and we would know when the fields changed based on the Git differential timestamps and pull requests, right? But I do it in Markdown because this would render in your GitLab or your GitHub page should you decide to keep this code in a Git repository. This would render as a table on GitHub. And then finally the mind map, which is more Markdown, I want to point out. Right? We could preview this as Markdown. This is what it looks like as Markdown. But if we render it as the mark map, that's what the formatted structure is supposed to be. So now we have this wonderful mind map of the device groups that we can drill into. So that's the code. Now let's do the Python. What's happening to generate this code? And I have a little script file that just runs CLI, and I'm doing asynchronous. So I bring in AIO HTTP, async IO, AIO files. I make this a rich click project with rich click, which helps me package up the CLI implementation. JSON pathlib Jinja2 for my templating. I'm disabling warnings with urllib3. And we take in the 3 variables, the path to the NSO API, the username, and the password, right? So the NSO HTTP. Now, what I'd like to do, and let me get my environment set up here. So I have a virtual environment called NSO that I develop in for this project. And it has the various pip packages that I use, but more importantly, it's Poetry is the package that's in here that lets me do my pip, my PyPy install through Poetry, so that way this code can be available through PyPy that you could pip install it. But anyway, that aside, we could run, Python 3 Leopold --help, and we need the URL, the username, and the password, and we could do that in a variety of ways. We could run Leopold --URL, and then the HTTPS URL, --username --password. That would work. We could run it interactively and answer these questions. But what I like to do is set up an environment and export them to my environment variables, right? So we're going to export username equals developer, export password equals services forever, and export the URL which I don't have memorized yet, to that. Okay, so now I can just run the code and it will authenticate. So what am I doing once I authenticate? Well, I'm going to make some directories locally, right? So when you run this code, make a folder called Leopold, and then it will make all of these subdirectories to hold the output files. and then go ahead and asynchronously run my main project. So let's jump to main. And what main is going to do, I like to just set up an API count and count how many APIs that the data has come from. So set that up as 0, and then for each API, right, set up a list as the API list. So if we take a look at the API list, right now I'm pulling from that device individual devices, right, and groups. So iterate over those and await the gather of each API, get API, right? So flatten all of this and run the self.getAPI function, passing in each individual API in that list asynchronously. Finally, await the self.all files with the JSON dump string of that results, right, for each result. So we're going to make files out of the big JSON payload that the getAPI function returns. So here's getAPI. We're going to set up our headers as Yang data JSON. So we want the Yang model data as JSON from the HTTP request that we're going to make asynchronously. Right, this is an asynchronous. Let me zoom in for you. I should have done this earlier. I can zoom in one more if you want. I think that's okay. All right, so asynchronously get each API that's being passed to you from the list of APIs. In this case, it's only 2, but this is going to grow. And I don't want any individual API request blocking the rest. So set up a AIO HTTP client session. And then in that session, .get the NSO HTTPS page that the user provided us, appended by the API URL path with our headers, right, which is accepting the Yang data JSON, and make sure we verify false, and we use basic auth with the username and password. Increment the API counter, and then this is not normally needed, this if statement, but for some reason this Sandbox JSON from device is it's just not formatted correctly, so I'm fixing that. But that aside, I'm awaiting the response from this asynchronous get.json, and that's the payload I want to work with. All right, so that's what getAPI does. And then for the all files, and I'm just going to collapse them, and I'll highlight the differences real quick before we get going. All right, so I asynchronously gather my file commands. And there's the JSON file, the YAML file. Now these two files don't use any Jinja templating. The main JSON file does a loop over the API and the payload from each of our requests, and then interrogates the API, and when it matches, then write the payload as JSON to the file. Now the only difference with the YAML file is that I take another step here and do a YAML dump from the YAML library and write that YAML file. Now for the other four, I am invoking Jinja templating. And actually, I'm just going to take a quick break and share this. On LinkedIn real quick. I'm doing some development. Check it out here. Okay. All right, so now the Jinja templating, I don't want it to be synchronous either. So you're going to notice here, this is important. In our environment variables, for Jinja 2, we're going to enable async true. Then we're going to await our templating using a render async function as opposed to just .render. So now our Jinja templating is also in line with our other functions. I should have mentioned this as well about the JSON. We are async writing AIO files and awaiting the write. So the writing of the data is non-blocking as well. But we add a little bit of templating information for us to pass the data into a Jinja 2 template. Right, so what we're doing here is I pass in the API or possibly a custom string to identify maybe a subsection of the overall API that I'm writing, which is what I'm doing here. And then the data to template, which is the payload. So that's where I'm at right now. I was about to do a new API, and we can look at the Python that I've already written, and then we'll get into starting the Jinja templates for these commands. Okay, so I was about to do lines. And this will make a little more sense as we go, I hope, now that you understand sort of the broad context. For the JSON payloads, I want to write them as JSON YAML, right? A YAML dictionary, the CSV file, and I have some filters on here. The HTML data table, and the Markdown and Mindmap. Now, there is only the one device that's providing me devices information. Well, there's three. There's 3 devices in here, but only one of them has the capability or the settings enabled. I'm not sure yet. It is the open sandbox, and I haven't really touched any of the configuration of NSO. But you can see here under config, there's only the library module state and Yang library state for this device, Whereas if I go to the device down below here, there is not only those two, but there is all of the Cisco iOS information. So what I'm doing is I'm going through each of these, and I'm here at line, and I'm transforming them into those file formats. So at scale, if this NSO had 50 or 1,000 or however many devices, you would get a report of each device's, line information or IP information or interface information, right? Just through this one command. So how would I do this? Well, first for the JSON file, I always start with just the JSON payload. And it's already half-baked here. I'm going to make an open, because I'm going to be iterating over each device that is in this outer group. I want to append that individual JSON payload for each of the devices in the device.config. And in particular, what I want to append is the device name, which I'm setting up myself here, and then the device's config, tailf ned Cisco iOS line, and then I'm asynchronously opening that as the file I want, and JSON dump string the final version of that payload, which I've already done. If we go to, I haven't run it yet. So we're going to run this for the first time. And again, for the YAML, it's the same thing, except I'm taking an extra step and doing a YAML dump of that finalized list so that it's YAML. And then for the 4 other files, I'm Jinja templating here the final outcome of the folder, and I'm calling it API Cisco iOS line. And that's what we'll work with in the Jinja template. Let's run the code and let's time it. Now it's quite the big payload, and I am doing this asynchronously, but we're waiting on the reply from no such directory. I got a typo. Yeah, well, oh well. Typo. Let's try it again. And it should have made this folder, and I'm just going to copy this git ignore file into my new folders. And let's take a look at the pruned payload when this runs. Okay, so it took 20 seconds. It's not too bad. Of real time, right? 0.6 seconds of user time, 0.081 seconds of system time. So here is the line output, and what we have is console and VTY. Now, we have options here. We could make a file for consoles and a file for VTYs, which is what I'm leaning towards doing, as opposed to one file with consoles and VTYs mixed together. They're their own lists and they have their own set of data. So that's what I'm leaning towards doing, which means I have to do the code twice. So I have to go back to the Python, but let's just deal with console first. And that's only going to be for the 4 templated files. So here, line I need the CSV version first. Here. And this is going to be line console. No, not the folder. I'm just going to put it in line, but I'm going to make this one more specific as line console. And this is line console. And this is line VTY. And this is line VTY. Okay, so that's the CSV. And let's do the Markdown. Okay, so we're just adjusting this here, and this is going to be console we're almost there. VTY. Now again, the JSON and the YAML, I'm not doing this. But for the templated files, I'm going to make 2 separate files, one for the console output and one for the VTY output. So we'll have different files for our different line types because they are different lists. Now I could mix and match them like I've done with interface. Even interface, I debate whether or not I should go back and make it a file for gigabit interfaces, a file for loopback interfaces, as opposed to mixing them. In this case, I'm going to not mix them, just as an example of how to do this separately into 2 separate files. We can always revisit the interface discussion and see if I should do that there as well. So that's line console, line VTY. All right, let's make sure nothing's broken. And then what we're going to do is make the CSV file. and we'll do it for both console and VTY. And there will no longer be a line file. That's right, we've split them. Okay, so now let's fill in the skeletons of these files with our template. So we're going to move into Jinja, and I always just move from the bottom. And we're going to find a simple one like this one. And we're going to paste that in. And we're definitely going to have device name. Now this was Cisco iOS line console. And line VTY. So we're always going to include this device name. So then at scale, we'll know, we'll have an anchor between the device that this came from and the console setting. Now it's going to be pretty cool at scale, having every console setting and VTY setting for every device that's in NSO with this Yang model will show up in a spreadsheet in just a few seconds. So for hit and data to template, that's my outer list, right? It could be data to template 0. I just like to make it in a for loop that's going to hit once. And I want to loop into console for this one. And where I get the device name, it's going to be hit.device name, comma. And then, so for console, we're going to have, and we can put them in any order we want here. Exec timeout, minutes, first, password secret, stop bits. And then for VTY, there's more. Now this is a list here for input transport. And right, it could have transport output, which I don't see here, so I can't really template it. Again, I'm trying to provide coverage for what I'm finding in the JSON. If we enable output transport and repoll this, that might be one way to do it, but I assume there's an output list as well. But for now, we'll just template what we have, and if as it grows or as we get more data sets involved, we can always go back and adjust the templates for more data. So I'm going to have exec timeout in minutes, first, last, login local, password secret, transport input, and we'll make that a list. There's a couple ways we could deal with it. If we make it a list and deal with it as a for loop there, we're going to get a row for each, which might not be bad. But again, if there's output, then that's going to need its own for loop, maybe as a separate line in the code. For now, like I said, we'll deal with it as we have the data. So let's go back to our console here, and we're going to need to add a for loop. Remember, we're right here. We're here right now in our for loop. Hey Mike, thanks for joining. Okay, so we're going to need another for loop to deal with this list here from console. Right, so for console in hit.console, then we can say console dot okay, so now this I can't dot into it because it has a hyphen. So we're going to express that like that. Dot minutes. And then console dot first. Console dot password dot secret. Console dot stop bits, and then down here for VTY in hit dot VTY. It might not like that because that's a list there. Let's see if it will just give us the full string here. I gotta keep an eye on that. Oh, we need one more for loop. Remember I said I was going to for input in vty.transport.input. And that's going to be input okay, all right. So that's our JSON payload there. We've run our Jinja template. Let's see what we can do with these two files here from this payload of JSON using Jinja 2. And we'll take a look and see if those templates worked. Did it just make this line file? Okay, hang on, let me just check that. This should be console. That should be VTY. Let's try it again. I haven't got to those files yet, but I noticed the new file got created. Well, we can still look at the data. All right, so here we go. Now it's not that impressive because it's only one device, but we would have the secret and the stop bits and the exact timeout for every device at scale in this one report. Now the VTY lines, oh, I missed .minutes. Okay, I have to go into .minutes there. So that was the VTY lines. Exact timeout .minutes. There we go. And right, and then I can see if what transport input is enabled for which device and the settings. It didn't trip up on the list here for none for local login. Now, if this has more than none, I don't know if it replaces none or if it becomes comma. If there's a comma involved, it will throw this off. We may want to do a pipe replace here. I'll leave it as it is for now, but we might want to pipe replace this in the CSV if local login has a comma. Make it a space or something. Pretty good though, pretty good. Okay, so now the rest is copy, replace. So that gives us two CSV files from the Yang model in NSO at scale, and from the overall device's JSON. That's where this came from. Right, was the tailf device, and then I went into the individual device config, right, and I gotta find it in here. I should have, right, so line, we isolate this API call and put this payload into the JSON and YAML files and then template it. We'll do logging next. We'll have to see how we want to handle logging. Let's go back to finish our API calls here. So there's these two that we want to copy, and we're going to do the Markdown format next. And for the Markdown format, we wrap these lines in pipes. We drop this down a line and add a header row. So this is devices, iOS, what do I call the other one? Device config iOS line VTY pipe, and open up a new pipe, and then here devices config iOS line console. And what we're going to do is find the commas and replace them with pipe space pipe. Not all of them, we don't want to break other code. And then what we need to do is add our delimiter row, which in this case isn't too bad because there's not too many fields. This can be a little tedious depending on the number of fields, but this one isn't too bad, especially since we're doing two APIs at a time here. And again, I do this because this code is really nice for Git-based repositories, and Git-based repositories support Markdown rendering natively in the browser. If you have any questions or want to just say, hey, I see a few people have tuned in, would love to interact with you. Just let me know what you're thinking. If you like this code, if you run NSO, if you have any questions or anything. Okay, so now let's take a look at our Markdown files. And they look good. Yep, looking good. Okay, so now the next one's the HTML page. And from the HTML page, I'm including a header. This header and this footer are wrapped around every HTML page that I template. Okay, so what you're going to see is not all, but some of my HTML here, and the rest is imported in Jinja as a separate template at the top and the bottom of this file, which gives me the complete HTML rendering of a data table. So we're just going to do some copy and replace here. And we're going to make this a row. And we're going to copy this here and here. And this is a row. Okay, and then I need the header information for each of these. And this is device line console. These are the header rows. And I gotta do that again. Here, VTY with the header rows. Okay, so now I do more find and replace of commas. In this case, it's going to be the closing header, the opening header, too many spaces, that's better, and then TD here, back to TH here, back to TD here. Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to run this. Oops. Run this. And we'll get HTML data table version of this information. So again, this is the payload. And if we go to our console, there it is there. We could move the secret over if we want, or only show the secret and the username or the device name. Not bad, not bad. And then the VTY lines in the loop, right? So we could limit this to just SSH or Telnet. We could search for SSH. Really handy file. And now let's do the mind map. Now for the mind map, I actually copy the HTML, not all of it. You'll see what I do. I reuse the HTML code. And then I get rid of all the tags. And header stuff. And make that a single pound symbol. And a single pound symbol. And then we're going to find and replace that. and that. Okay, so then for each hit, we want the name, device name, and then we're going to have exec timeout minutes first secret stop bits. Same thing here. I'm going to take the hit, the name, and then for VTY, exec timeout minutes, first, last, local, secret, and then what we can do here is input like that. Let's try it. Let's try it. And again, this is going to be the mind maps. Okay. So that is the line command from start to finish. So like really, let's just do the next command. I don't mind. That's what I'm streaming for. If you have any questions, let me know. So what we're going to do is find that next command in the config of this router, because it has all of the Yang models that are open in the data. We've done a good majority of them now. So logging. Now, logging could be any number of things, right? So let's see how we want to do this. If we just do a for loop and get the key and the value. But it's not a list. I don't know. Usually like this isn't a list, right? So it's just dot buffered or dot monitor. Again, we're going to just work with the data that we have. So let's go ahead and do our Python copy and paste. So instead of line, we want a folder called logging. And then for the JSON file, instead of line, we want logging. Whoops. And that's there, 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 and there. And then here is going to be logging. Logging, and then one more replace there. and then let's do the YAML next. And let's run it. And let me copy my git ignore file into my new folders. Okay, so there's the JSON. And there is the yeah, it's too bad it's not device name first. Alright, so let's finish the Python copy and paste for our templated sections. My wife might be getting home, so you're going to have to mind the dogs for a little bit. Sorry about that. I gotta make sure I didn't make a mistake up above. Hang on. Pretty sure I did. Yep. Okay, and then a couple more little templates here to write. Okay, so now we're going to template. I wish it was a little more complete, but we'll template what we have. Like I said, I'm making it against the Sandbox, and this is the data that we have. So what we're going to do is go to the CSV file and take console. And if it's logging, okay, so there's buffered, severity, level, monitor, severity level. we'll take that into our Markdown file. Devices, config, iOS, logging. And then into the HTML page. And then finally we'll take this over into the mind map. Device name. And then the two different levels. Actually, let's just do it like this. There we go. It's all right. I was just checking in on something. Okay, so here we go. There is the CSV, HTML, JSON, Markdown, Mindmap. Time is it? Could probably do maybe one more. I'm just wondering if I want to do the how I want to do this. I think I could do this. This wouldn't be bad to have. Again, it's at the scale, right? We got to remember that there will be more than just the one device. So to have a list of all of your iOS devices indicating whether or not on success login logs are created would be nice to have as a field in a report. So I don't see why we wouldn't want to do this. So again, it's just copy paste work really from this point on. We're going to go into our main Python and we're going to add the directory. Sorry about the dogs. Log in. Hello? I'm on the YouTube. So we take and make logging log in. Okay, we may as well do them all. And then we'll do our templates after we have the JSON to take a look at. We have it already, but we'll just make sure that everything's working. And that should be think that should do it. Let's try it before I get too far ahead of myself. And I need to copy in my git ignore files. And once I have these templated, I'll do a commit into the repository, go over the README file with you, and yeah, that looks good. Okay, all right, so let's finish up these templates for the Markdown. Okay, that should wrap up the templates. Let's take a look at the files and then commit this code and quickly show you how you can run this for yourself. Again, if we go to the DevNet Sandbox, you can use this address, this username, this password, and this code will work and give you the output that I'm showing you right now. That's all you need to do. You can clone the repository and it should just run for you. And let's take a look at the, and the mind map. Okay, so let's get rid of all the output files and commit just the code that we want. Well, I'm just wrapping things up here. Let me just do this a little easier. Okay, well, thanks for joining me. It's all pulled into the repository and ready for you to use. Have a good one.